description below. Hey guys, welcome back to War Thunder, and welcome to a slight return of Simulator Battles. Now, I've been gone from the sim community for a good year and a half. I know that I'm probably not the first person you think about when it comes to sim, but I am one of the only people who ever tried to, well, work with Simulator game without actually using a flight stick, which is usually the advertised way of flying in simulators. Now, I made a tutorial 2 years ago, which was titled How to Fly in Sim with Nothing But With Your Mouse Aim, and a couple of months ago, guys reached out to me with a review sample of the new Thrustmaster T-Flight Hotas 4. Now, I'd say that I'm adequately experienced to review this, but I'm not, because I've never used any other flight stick, which means I have nothing to compare it to. Also, my experience with flight sticks is exactly 5 days, because that's how long I've had this stick with me. So, of course, everything I'm about to tell you, do take it with a grain of salt, but I'll try to be as unbiased and as, first impressionistic as I possibly can be about the actual performance of the flight stick. And I thought by far the best way to do that, to use any kind of already given experience, is to compare the mouse and keyboard performance to the performance of the Thrustmaster Hotas 4, and to then ask myself the question, is it worth it buying a $70 flight stick, if you can really just use the equipment you already have, not spending a cent? And immediately upon receiving the actual set, I came up with a bit of a problem, which was there's no head tracking. Now, those of you who have flown in simulator gameplays know that a massive amount of the advantage is based upon having some sort of head tracking device. Now, this could be your webcam, this could be a cheaper program, this could be a cheaper version of the Track IR or the Track IR itself. They come in different shapes and sizes and also in different costs. Now, to make this as unbiased as possible, I had to eliminate the head tracking device from the question at hand, primarily because I didn't have any, and because with the mouse and keyboard, the idea is that you're playing sim without spending a single cent. Whilst playing with a flight stick, I did not want to add additional costs by having to download or pay for certain software or actually order physical components online. Now, with that said, we can already kind of foresee a handicap in the performance of the flight stick, meaning that my situational awareness is going to be worse than that of just using a mouse and keyboard. But the control surfaces are going to be easier to work with. So I thought this actually kind of worked out in itself. With the mouse, I should be able to be slightly more precise by being able to spot the enemy. With the flight stick, I should be able to be more precise in the actual maneuvering with the enemy and try to get shots on target. So in the end, it kind of levels out the playing field. So how did I go about comparing the two? Well, to start off, I first had to go into the actual controls and set the Thrustmaster up. The controls provided automatically by War Thunder's control system were a little bit off, so I had to go and set every single thing myself. But I was used of doing that. I was used of actually working with the controls since I had to do that with mouse aim anyways. I first did a bit of a comparison in test flights, just to see how different planes performed, see how I could get around it, and then I did also jump into a couple of sim matches, primarily with the current rotation on a New Guinea map, which is between the British and the Japanese. The reason I went into this particular map is because I'm not a fan of enduring conflict, and I'm also not a fan of tank sim. So what I did was I joined this easiest to explain as a combination of RB with enduring conflict from sim, which means that what you get is the same map size as RB, same takeoff, same procedure, it just lasts a little bit longer. And from a gameplay perspective, this is one of the greatest things I've ever played with, because for someone coming from RB, it doesn't feel like you're playing on a weird map. Enduring conflict in general combines extremely huge maps, with like 3 airfields, very few players. It's very confusing for me. I'm not a fan of enduring conflict, so I have to say this new development they're working on is something they should definitely put in more work. It's showing the results, and it was extremely fun to play with. So to anyone at Gaijin, development team, definitely put more work into the next-gen simulator battles. There's a lot of potential there. And speaking of potential, whilst we're at this topic, I'm just going to jump into this real quick. Gaijin is doing a cooperation with Thrustmaster, so if you do want to apply as a tester, there's going to be applications open for, I believe, 2 weeks, during which, of course, you'll be able to apply as a tester for the stick yourselves and get a a review sample for absolutely free. So there'll be a link in the description below if you're interested in flying in sim, if you're interested in testing this out, or if you have any former experience. I would warmly welcome that you check out the link, get applied, and perhaps you might receive a free testing stick yourselves. Alright, now to show you a little bit about the actual flight stick itself, on the left-hand side you've got your throttle control. This is what you're going to be using to control the throttle of the aircraft. On the back you have this little kind of a ledge system. I think if I zoom it in for a little bit, you can use this to, I've set it myself to zoom it in and out. You have the R2 and the L2 key, which you can use to look behind you, maybe change your flaps. Depends, of course, on what you've set them up to be. On the front, you've also got keys for whatever you want to assign them for. I like having some of mine as the air brake and to be able to head movement up, which enables you to look over from the top of the aircraft to have a bit of a better overview, and also gear, but we can't switch that because we haven't taken off yet. The stick itself, though, if I zoom out here, so you can actually see the control surfaces, obviously works like an actual flight stick. So rotating it left, this is going to be our X-axis, which is going to control the ailerons. Our Y-axis controls the elevators, and of course the rudder is controlled by the twist of the wrist. Now on top of it, you'll notice something a bit peculiar. This is a little kind of a mushroom dome type binding for your thumb, and what you can do with this is of course to assign it to look around the plane. Now this looks better in a kind of this is a theoretical kind of approach. In actual battle, this tends to prove a little bit difficult to use, which is what we're going to touch on later, which is the head tracking is kind of what's missing with all flight sticks. So what I've done is I've assigned a key here that resets the view every single time, regardless of where you're looking at. It comes in extremely handy when trying to refocus after looking behind your six. Other than that, a couple of other buttons you can bind, and of course the main one, your guns, is going to be on the trigger. So to show you something more about how we're going to do this, we're actually going to take off, do a bit of a run around, land it, and see how the flight stick performs. Alright, so if I zoom out my view, put up a throttle, and I'm going to fly this very amateurly, you'll see just how easy it is to actually get the aircraft off of the carrier in this case, which is, in theory a little bit harder than actually taking off from an airfield. So of course, adjust with the rudder, simply take off, put our gear up, and that is it. Very little work had to be required to put the aircraft up in the air. Now, this is where the kind of flying comes to be a little bit difficult. Now, you'll first see that our aircraft, if we're not holding the stick, is automatically moving. This is something called engine torque, and the aircraft, well, depending on which one you're flying, will pull slightly to the left, slightly to the right, and it might also pull the elevator down. So to do and compensate that, you might want to start using something called auto trimming, which means if I see the aircraft is going slightly down and slightly towards the left, I'll adjust the stick, and then I'm going to press a key binding, which makes the trim happen. Now, of course, trimming is something you have to practice a bit with, and I'm very, very bad at it, but trimming might come in extremely handy, and should come in handy for all of you who are actually playing Sim seriously. Now, to land the actual aircraft, again here, looking around becomes a little bit difficult. As you'll see, you have to use the same hand to both control the aircraft as well as actually look around. Now, whilst I can, fly with only one hand at use, it is very, very difficult to get used to this and very quick to get disoriented in the heat of the battle. So, from this perspective, the stick is significantly easier to use in a, single test flight or maybe single missions, not so much in an actual intense dogfight. But for the sake of flying around and testing the stick, I think it is still adequate enough. Now, to decrease throttle, to increase, of course, everything you're doing is you're moving around your main control surface, and to zoom in and out, you can use the key bindings as for say. Now, the difference between a stick and an actual mouse aim would be leadly the fact that it's much easier to get into a flat spin using a keyboard and mouse than it is using an actual flight stick, because just the feeling of controlling the aircraft the way an actual pilot would kind of adds that bit of weariness to the topic. Alright, so we get our gear down here. There's going to be a very, very nasty landing. Of course, I'm landing from the wrong direction here on the carrier. Not very important for the sake of the demonstration. If we get the gear down, lower it on the deck, we shouldn't have any problems catching onto the hook. Of course, the propeller tends to get broken most of the time because I wasn't pulling full elevators, but you can see the aircraft is in one piece, and as such, the demonstration is not very hard to prove, even in lifetime, with someone who's very inexperienced in the use of controls. Now, to also touch into the actual mouse and keyboard part of things, it would be adequate enough for me to actually show you how that works for anyone who hasn't watched my review on on the subject at hand. Now, I have a very particular sim configuration here. It's a very simple one. You can download it. I'll put a link to the actual the original guide there. The point of view from the mouse perspective is that a lot of the controls are very much similar to the ones you might use in an actual air battle. So, you know, your scroll will control your zoom, your mouse is sort of working like a joystick. So what you have to imagine here is that instead of using your mouse, you're kind of holding a joystick here, which, you know, might look a bit unnatural, but from a flying perspective, it really isn't much more difficult than using a joystick per se. Obviously, certain things are a little bit different, but it is the perspective of being able to control the plane using this still works. Now, you still have the input from your keyboard, so I can technically fly without touching my mouse, but again, you'll see the control surfaces are not nearly as smooth as flying with a joystick. This isn't just because I'm not used to it. It generally, you see how the plane jitters? That is something that happens when you don't quite have the feel of the control. And landing procedures as well as takeoff are quite a bit more difficult being performed in a mouse aim aspect than they are performed with a joystick. So whilst I do think that situational awareness is easier to be performed whilst using a mouse simply because of the ease of looking around, the overall experience that a joystick gives you is going to be easier than trying to land on a carrier. Now, this was a bit of a flopped landing, but I think you get the idea at the end of the day. So I think mouse aim is ideal for those of you who want to use the simplicity of having all the equipment at hand. It isn't, though, quite that attractive to somebody who wants to have the proper feel and control of the aircraft they're flying. So is the Thrustmaster Hotas Flight 4 worth purchasing, or is it something more of a gimmick? Could you get more performance out of an actual mouse? I think that any flight stick on the market you can find is going to be extremely handy. The amount of functionality you can get out of this is pretty much unlimited as long as you have a nice imagination with the way you want to have the control set up. Something I forgot to mention is you actually have the joystick sensibility on the bottom here, so you simply have a twist mechanism which you can adjust. Even an imbus key is provided on the bottom of the set, so you can open it up if something goes wrong. There's a lot more to simulator when flying with a stick than there is to flying with a mouse. And I say to everyone who is kind of on the torn idea of maybe trying out Sim, to first use the mouse. Do give it a try, see how Sim works out for you. It's going to be a bit difficult, but I think somebody who's coming from RB, that settings are not that different. And if you do find it interesting, if you do find it like it's a game where you'd like to dive into deeper, then investing some money into a joystick of any sorts and perhaps a head tracking might be more than worth your money. So I think that if you have about €100 worth of investing to buy a nice starter pack for your sim career, perhaps, I definitely advise that the Thrustmaster is a more than adequate starter kit. Now, how this performs with other games, I cannot guarantee. I cannot even test it because I don't play any other sim games. But I'm sure that some of the other reviewers that might come out on the actual fly stick themselves, I think 5 of them were sent out, will have some information on that as well. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it was something a little bit different to look at. And I'll be back again this week, of course, on Wednesday with some classic RB content. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Free Golden Eagles for War Thunder. Download the app in the description below.
Hey guys, welcome back to War Thunder, and welcome to a slight return of Simulator Battles. Now, I've been gone from the sim community for a good year and a half. I know that I'm probably not the first person you think about when it comes to sim, but I am one of the only people who ever tried to, well, work with Simulator game without actually using a flight stick, which is usually the advertised way of flying in simulators. Now, I made a tutorial 2 years ago, which was titled How to Fly in Sim with Nothing But With Your Mouse Aim, and a couple of months ago, guys reached out to me with a review sample of the new Thrustmaster T-Flight Hotas 4. Now, I'd say that I'm adequately experienced to review this, but I'm not, because I've never used any other flight stick, which means I have nothing to compare it to. Also, my experience with flight sticks is exactly 5 days, because that's how long I've had this stick with me. So, of course, everything I'm about to tell you, do take it with a grain of salt, but I'll try to be as unbiased and as, first impressionistic as I possibly can be about the actual performance of the flight stick. And I thought by far the best way to do that, to use any kind of already given experience, is to compare